Your hosts, Tom Theophanis and Scott Jordan.
We have Edgar Fouche, retired U.S. Air Force and defense contractor, with us tonight. He is the author of the book Alien Rapture and a special guest on alienscientist.com forum. Edgar, or Ed as his friends call him, came out and made his first disclosure back in 1998. He was the first one to describe how the TR-3B flying triangle, or Astra, and its purpose, as well as other classified aircraft and technology. His sole purpose is to get information out to people, and he is not promoting or selling anything. Okay, so there was an event in the book. Now, of course, some of the listeners who haven't read Alien Rapture won't understand the characters we're talking about, but everybody who has absolutely will. Just maybe back up a bit and talk about some of the military work that you did, some of the programs that you worked on in the military, and describe your military career, and then we'll sort of shoot back to the book and the characters in it.
In 1967, I was in Kilgore College in East Texas. I had graduated from Longview High School near there. In February 67 was the biggest draft month since World War II, and I believe it was like 42,000 people were drafted. I was drafted out of college. I had 5 out of 6 deferments. Back then, on the draft, you had a draft board and you had deferments. Like if you were married or had a kid or worked as a defense contractor or when in college making a C or better average. I had 5 of those 6 deferments. The only deferment I didn't have, I wasn't physically or mentally incapacitated. And the rich kids didn't go. So us middle-class kids did. So the deferments did nothing for me. Now, Dick Cheney, I think, had a cyst on his ass, or that was Rush Limbaugh, or, they got deferments for the slightest things.
They had a hangnail. Oh, look, can't go. Sorry.
No, absolutely. So I went in basic training in around June of 67. I had a late enlistment of 3 months, and I volunteered for pararescue. Those guys that jump out of aircraft, helicopters usually to save down pilots. And I busted my ankle at Fort Benning, so I was recycled through Keesler Air Force Base and went to several schools there, airborne communications, navigations, a basic crypto, 16 weeks of advanced electronics, and then after a full year at Keesler, I was, my first assignment was Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. And that's where there were 2 instances that totally changed my career for the rest of my career. One was they had a top secret nuclear tester to be used on the aircraft. The ground crew could use it to test out not only the weapon, but the delivery and the control boxes and all that stuff. So this chief, and I believe a tech sergeant, had totally screwed up the wiring on this modification of the tester. And that was when they first came out with push-pull pins on Canon connectors. And people weren't really familiar with it. So they really stripped out the retainer rings in the connectors. So I had this friend, he was a retired chief, Ted West, was a tech rep, a civilian tech rep, GS-12. And I told him, I said, we can fix this temporarily if you would get approval. So he went to Captain Sullivan, who was the same colonel I talked about earlier. He was a captain at Cannon, and he was AMS commander, Avionics Maintenance Squadron. So what we did is we basically used super glue and lacing string. Now, believe it or not, they actually used to teach a school for lacing. It's where you take that really fine, flat nylon string that you buy in rolls now, and you would lacing, almost like weaving, and we laced up the wires so that the loose ones would be tied to the ones that were in the wires are in there firmly. So we fixed that, and everybody all the way up to the wing commander, Colonel Robert Scott, knew that, this young sergeant at the time, had done this. And then towards the end of the middle of my tour at Canon, I was there a little over 3 years. I went to a crypto school to learn to repair the crypto equipment plus the code boxes. Now, these code boxes were about, I guess about the size of one of those little double-fold cassette holders where it would hold like 3 layers of 4 cassettes. And it had sliders on it that were rods. And the daily codes, you would change the daily codes by putting in the codes, letter A through Z on each rod, and then you'd lock it. So when you went out to the aircraft, you could reset the aircraft that morning that was going to fly that day and put the new codes in it. So when the identification friend from foe, IFF transponders, would query another aircraft, the other aircraft could send back the correct codes, and they would know it was friendly.
Okay.
So I was looking at the maintenance technical order, and it had test codes. It had like a whole page of test codes. There weren't actual codes, but there were test codes so that you could put them in the tester, and it would work, and you could verify the coder was working. So I got this bright idea in my mind to play a trick on the class, and I memorized these 32 codes, and I challenged the instructor. I said, well, I can just make up a code that'll work, and everybody laughed at me and had some derisive comments that weren't very flattering. So I put my code in there, and he plugged it into the tester, and it worked. And he was astounded. And they really thought I had busted the crypto code. So next thing I know, his chief in there from field training detachment's in there, and I had to do it again. And then they call my commander and said, this kid's the most brilliant thing since the wheel. And then that also went all the way up. Rumors went all the way up to the wing commander. So at some point, the NSA guys knew my name.
Right.
And from Canon on, every assignment I ever had, I was either handpicked or I would make phone calls and I would get the assignment I want. And I could pretty much do anything. I was just like gold plated all of a sudden. I was the miracle boy.
Right. Just by that simple trick of memorizing 30 codes. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the first time the NSA came down, which was a couple of months later, this guy, he says, how'd you do it? And I said, I don't know. It was just, by that time I'd got so much attention, I was afraid to tell him I made it up. I mean, I just copied it, memorized it.
Right.
And when I memorized this alpha, 32 alpha codes, I made sentences up.
Okay.
Like A, B, C, D, all boys can do. In other words, I made up several sentences. So when I put the codes in, I just recall the sentences and put the first letter in of each word.
Right.
So this NSA guy, he was very intense, and I told him, I said, well, it seemed logical to me, and it was intuitive. I said, I'm really intuitive, which I was. And he looked at me like, man, I'm not buying this crap at all. But they let it drop, and so from the rest of my career, I was involved in one new system after another. I worked the 3 models of the F-111, the F-15, the F-16, the original B-1, the A-10, all during the heyday of development of these great aircraft. I was on either research and development of the aircraft or the systems on the aircraft or the automatic test equipment that was being built to test the units from the aircraft, like the radar or communications or navigation units. And that all stemmed from those 2 little things I did at Cannon Air Force Base as a sergeant.
How did you eventually end up at Area 51?
After I left Cannon, I went to Mountain Home Air Force Base, and then after 2 years there, I ended up at Edwards Air Force Base. I was originally supposed to be with Tactical Air Command at the Air Force Flight Test Center doing research and development, flight operational tests and evaluation, FOT&E, on the new F-15. But the Air Force Systems Command had a slot for a shop chief of the automatic test equipment, and back then electronics countermeasures was under automatics. And they actually had a little battle over who's going to get me. So AFFTC at Edwards, I got assigned to them.
Okay.
And my boss was a paperclip boy. His name was Franz Dietrich. And he was one of those Germans that they brought over after World War II.
Paperclip, yeah.
And he was there his whole career, I think, until he either died or retired. And we at Edwards, we did a lot of fun things, like we prepped the Streak Eagle, which broke 8 time to climb records. Now, the F-15 was the first jet aircraft that had more thrust than weight. So the damn thing could actually accelerate going straight up like a rocket.
Wow.
And I pulled lots of different PDYs for different companies that were developing avionics units or test equipment for the avionics units. And then when I left Edwards after 3 years, we took all our equipment test stations and moved them to Nellis Air Force Base. Now, that's how I got to Nellis, which has a huge Nellis range that Area 51's part of. So I was involved in a lot of electronic countermeasures and satellite stuff while I was at Nellis. And then at some point, I had this friend, let me back up just there, I had this friend, Dave, Senior Master Sergeant Dave Cassing at Edwards, and he was in charge of all the enlisted people at Groom Air Base.
Right.
And he was in Detachment 3. And a lot of people don't know that Air Force Flight Test Center, FFTC Detachment 3, runs the actual operations at Groom Air Base, Area 51. So the whole time I was at Nellis, he kept trying to get me out there full time at Groom, and I had no interest. I was having a lot of fun traveling and learning new stuff, and I had no interest in being stuck out there in the desert,
yeah.
You know, all week long.
But you're enjoying doing what you were doing.
Oh, absolutely. So at one point, I got a phone call from Wing Commander's office. It was a lieutenant colonel, I believe, and he said, "I need you to report to this building or whatever." And I believe Cubic, CUBIC Corporation, was also in that building because I saw some of their flight simulators and stuff that was very interesting. So anyway, this lieutenant colonel says, "We need you to go up to a base in the desert and work on some equipment." And he asked me, he says, "Are you qualified on this unit and this unit?" And I said, yes. And he says, "According to this, you have a top secret Q clearance. So I need you to go up there." And he says, "Do you have any reason you can't go?" Well, I said, "No, sir." I said, "How long?" He says, "As long as it takes." So I reported in at, I think it was 4:30 in the morning. We got on this blacking out bus, and we drove from Nellis all the way up to Green Air Base. And once you get off the highway there around Indian Springs, depending on which way you go in, it's pretty much improved gravel roads.